The gospel that Marcella just read is known as the Transfiguration, and that's what I'll be referring to it today. The Transfiguration is frequently debated in scholarly literature, but I'll spare you the debate, mostly. We will accept it as it occurs in Matthew 17. Allowing this does not minimize the strangeness of this story, especially in Matthew. Many years ago, many rectors ago, the rector of the Church of the Advent in Boston was asked to describe what happened in the Eucharist. He responded that when the Eucharist worked, it was as overwhelming as opera and as intimate as a kiss. When I read the Transfiguration, I imagine that for Peter, James, and John, the experience was as intimate as a kiss and as overwhelming as opera. Unfortunately for them, but perhaps fortunately for us, they didn't know what to do with the experience, and they obviously didn't understand it until after the resurrection. The story begins with the phrase, 6 days after Peter acknowledged Jesus as the Messiah. This drives home the point that Peter never has a clue why he's saying whatever he says. Had Peter understood what it meant for Jesus to be Messiah, then he would have responded differently at the Transfiguration. He is clueless. He equates Jesus with Elijah and Moses, which he thinks is pretty high. But Peter was looking for a Messiah who would free him from political oppression and human suffering. He wanted a Messiah who would make Peter healthy, wealthy, and wise. Instead, as we learn in the Gospels, the only way we can understand Jesus as Messiah or Christ is to radically redefine the term. Jesus as Messiah disappoints every expectation of Messiah. He does not overthrow the Romans. He will only promise his disciples that they will share his fate, or as many of you have heard me say many times, the gospel only makes one promise, and that is you will be treated no worse than your Savior, and they crucified him. So it is no wonder that Peter, who always says the wrong thing and looks for the wrong Messiah, is confused at the Transfiguration. So Jesus and his 3 closest disciples climb an unnamed hill, and Jesus' clothes become whiter than it is possible by human washing. Elijah and Moses appear and have a conversation, apparently out of earshot from the disciples with Jesus. Peter, as always, as I've said, being both impetuous and wrong, immediately suggests that they erect individual dwellings for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Now, as you've probably gathered by now, literary technique in Matthew, Mark, and Luke is that if Peter says it, it's wrong. So anytime you're reading the Gospels on your own, if Peter says it, that's the wrong thing. It keeps one humble if one's name is Peter, believe me. And here he reveals... Rocks. Here he reveals that he has no idea what has just happened. He is, as always, clueless. He will remain clueless until after the resurrection. Then a cloud descends on them, perhaps like the cloud that descended upon us yesterday morning. Remember, though, that in Palestine we are in an arid part of the world, so moisture was revered, and a cloud descending was not the normal event it is for us. So 4 men ascend a hill, it probably was a hill, not a mountain, near Jerusalem. Elijah and Moses appear, a cloud surrounds them, and a voice from the cloud announces to Peter, James, and John that Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus tells them as they descend the hill that they are to tell no one about this. He tells them this because they have no idea what they have just experienced. Matthew has Jesus working to redefine what it means to be Son of God or Messiah, so the disciples are counseled to keep quiet until Matthew is ready to reveal what it means through the Easter event. Of course, today's reading occurs in a context. Immediately before the Transfiguration, as I already stated, Peter has told Jesus that he is the Messiah, and Jesus responds by telling Peter that he will be the rock, a reference to Peter's nickname, not because he was solid in his faith, but because he had a rock between his ears. Then as that rock, he will be the foundation upon which Jesus will build the church. If you've ever wondered why Matthew is the first gospel, we think that's because the Catholics got him first, and they want to make this the first story you heard about that, because in Mark and Luke, Peter doesn't get this little honor. Jesus tells him to keep the knowledge to himself, and in the verses between Peter identifying Jesus as the rock and the transfiguration, Jesus continues redefining what it means to be the Messiah, as Matthew has been doing since the opening of the gospel according to Matthew. No messianic secret in Matthew. Right from chapter 1, Jesus is the Christ. But now we have to tell you what the Christ is, because you have the wrong idea. Peter objects that Jesus, and by implication Peter, will suffer. So Jesus here responds that Satan has tempted Peter to avoid suffering. The way to glory is through the cross. Now I would hope that had I been at the Transfiguration, that it would have changed my life. I think the event would have had an impact on me. Not so the disciples. It recalls an event, it's not in the script, you know you're in trouble when I look up, that Marcella will be going through in 6 months. I was made a priest on December 18th, 1976. And I was convinced that that would change me fundamentally. And I woke up on December 19th, and I was a celebrant at St. Andrew's Church in Murray Hill, New Jersey, and the preacher. And I was the same guy I was when I woken up the day before it hadn't done a thing. I was very disappointed. I thought the world would change. So like the disciples, nothing's changed. Some scholars conclude that therefore the Transfiguration cannot be historical. Had it actually changed, Peter, James, and John at least would have been changed. But that misses Matthew's point. At the Transfiguration, 3 men are let in on more of what it means for Jesus to be Messiah. They have no idea what it means, at least not fully, and they fail to process it effectively. Peter continues to get it wrong consistently. Jesus continues his road to the crucifixion essentially alone, since those close to him do not understand him. Only after the resurrection are the disciples able to understand the gospel. Where do we live today? Are we the post-resurrection community, or are we confused and on the mountain with Peter, James, and John? If we are the post-resurrection community, then we know that we will live eternally in the light of Easter, and all things are possible because that which matters most, our salvation, has been taken care of. However, all things being possible doesn't mean that we become healthy, wealthy, and wise. It means that our future is secure. Christians frequently get that wrong. They think if I just pray the right way, then God will give me what I want. Well, he has. He's given you Easter. I know very few people who live this way. It is easy to lose the joy of Easter and get bogged down in minutiae or the humdrum of daily existence. Despite our weekly celebration of the resurrection, most of us will leave this church behaving as we entered. Those who encounter us will see little or no visible change in our lives. We give in to the demands of our daily life. The church, in its infinite wisdom, has a gift for us. On Wednesday, Ash Wednesday, we begin Lent. While we all know that Lent is characterized by discipline and fasting, what we often forget is that this is done to prepare us for Easter. Discipline and fasting are not the end. Resurrection and hope are. Can we engage in discipline and fasting in a manner that leads to resurrection and hope? Can we come down off the mountain of the Transfiguration and resist resuming life as it was? Can we live proleptically? That is, can we live as if the promised future has already arrived? The disciples clearly did not. They didn't want to hear that the Messiah and by extension his followers would suffer and be persecuted. They wanted to know that their contributions would be recognized and honored. And this, Andrew Lloyd Webber has it right in Jesus Christ Superstar. He has a whole lot wrong, but in the song that always thought that I would be an apostle, knew that I could make it if I died, he's got it right. That's where the apostles were. Jesus promised just the opposite. It seems to me that the church, the larger church that we read about in the papers, has lost sight of the resurrection and decided that it needs respect and must demand respect from society. And we know that the largest churches, those that meet in arenas, promise individual freedom and individual success if you will only come, say the right words, and give 10%. If you do that, it's going to happen. And that way the pastor can have a big house, a big car, and maybe a plane. That misses the whole point of the gospel. The prosperity gospel misses the whole point. The gospel is all about living in community. None of us can be Christians in isolation. We are only Christians when we're all together. And that's the gospel promises are all for us to be all together. I wonder if the larger church were to embrace the gospel necessity of witness and suffering, then it would not only more visibly ally itself with the poor and the powerless, but that it would accept burdens which it does not want and witness how to live with faith under them. In other words, if the Catholic bishops are right and contraception is a sin, and I don't think it is, I'm in favor of contraception, imagine the witness they would give were they to accept the mandate to provide health insurance to everyone in their hospitals and in their schools while continuing in a ministry to those born out of wedlock or those born in poverty or those born with physical or mental challenges. If they wouldn't insist that they be respected and they don't have to do that because they think it's a sin, just say, we're under Caesar what's Caesar's, provide the insurance. What a witness that would be. If indeed our society, which is clearly over-sexualized, challenges the church, then it seems to me that the demand on the church is that it stand with the orphans, the poor, those of color, those who are discriminated against for their sexuality, today most especially those who are transsexual, those who are discriminated because of their beliefs or their legal status, meaning illegal refugees. I frankly do not see how the church can have an opinion on anything other than justice until justice is universal. But of course, I have no power and nothing to protect. The disciples had no power and nothing to protect. We are more fully the church, I maintain, when we have no power and protect nothing. I think we are in a time in this country when it will be the easiest it's been in my lifetime to be the church. It is clear what the gospel stands for, and all we have to do to be the church is to stand with the gospel and resist any attempt to compromise on it. The gospel does not stand to make us first wealthy, healthy, free from diversity, or promise us secure borders. The gospel says that we find Christ when we ally ourselves with the poor. Lent is a perfect time to rediscover what that means. Marcella will be detailing for you the many offerings in this parish in Lent. I would only add that I would welcome you to join me and a little more than 20 of your fellow parishioners at the Bible study of Matthew that we hold in McKinsey every Monday morning from 10 to 11:30. This week we begin on Matthew 3, which is the baptism of Christ, a perfect time to come, and we even provide coffee. If you speak to me after the service, I'll be glad to give you more details or put you in touch with someone who is already attending. In the Transfiguration, God seems to have decided that perhaps Jesus has progressed enough in his ministry that he is ready to go public, or perhaps he decides that the disciples have progressed far enough in their ministries that they are ready to receive a little more insight. But clearly God is not saying that the world has suddenly become transformed and will accept Christianity. The world has never accepted Christianity without seeking to tame it. The world has been comfortable saying that it values Jesus' sayings, his teachings, without realizing that he had very few original thoughts. He almost entirely quotes the Old Testament. The world has been comfortable with Christianity as a political power, while forgetting that Jesus, and especially Paul, changed the meaning of the word Christ to empty it of all political power. The Transfiguration is not for the world, it is for us. It is for us to continue with the disciples as bad examples, to focus on the life that our Lord lived and realize that Christianity calls for us to live in a different way. The teaching on the Son of Man we receive in the Gospels tell us nothing about how to run a successful nonprofit organization. They say nothing about pledge drives, heating bills, pension payments, and employment issues. They focus instead on the reality that following the Son of God, God's beloved, means a lifelong journey toward justice. The point is not that every moment of a good Christian's life will be spent working for justice. It is that the time we spend caring for what Jesus cared about informs and blesses the rest of our lives. Pledging, paying bills, making pension payments, and providing health insurance are all important. They just aren't the most important thing. They are antepenultimate. I do not join with those who say that the president is not my president. He is my president, and I pray for him daily, by name, to be successful. It's just that I think being successful means that we as a country, or at least certainly as a church, must stand with the gospel and care today and tomorrow, primarily about the vulnerable, the poor, the homeless, the mentally ill, the undocumented, and all who suffer or suffer with them. At the Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John were confused. There is no sin in confusion. I just hope for revelation and clarity. At Easter, Peter, James, and John finally got clarity and saw what they were called to do. It is our job as the church to never let go of that clarity and to pray that our leaders embrace it. We are at a time when it will be easy to be the church. Our role is clear. If we have the faith to pursue it, then we will be leading the life we were created for. The special program offerings in Lent, including the Monday Bible study of Matthew, are intended to help you and me figure out what the content of our faith is intended to be. We read the story of the Transfiguration as we get ready for Lent to remind us of what's important, with the hope that having this in mind, we will actually change our lives to worry about what God worries about. We can do this because Easter is real. It is not a surprise. Our end is assured. There is a place prepared for us so we can dare to risk. This morning, and especially Ash Wednesday evening, we will experience the intimacy of a kiss coupled with the overwhelming force of an opera.